I never thought a moment like that, the one where the whole world feels silent except for your own heartbeat, would mean so much, especially with him right there, completely unaware. It was one of those nights that started out normal, just the usual buzz of city noise seeping through the cracked window, and me lying there pretending to be asleep. I did that on purpose, of course, but what I didn't expect was how much I'd actually feel everything, from the way his fingers twitched against the blanket to the almost imperceptible sigh he let out when he thought I was out cold. Let me back up a bit. His name's Jamie. We met a few months ago at this tiny indie bookstore that doubles as a coffee shop on the corner of 5th and Monroe. I was browsing through some old vinyl records in the back when he showed up with this ridiculous stack of poetry books and looked like he'd just stumbled out of a Wes Anderson movie. He had this kind of messy charm, dark hair that was always a little too long, and these sharp blue eyes that flickered like they were hiding something. Or maybe just a secret joke. We didn't hit it off instantly or anything. There was a lot of awkward silences at first, mostly because I'm the kind of guy who overthinks every word before I say it. And Jamie, well, he's exactly the kind of person who makes you want to stop overthinking and just say whatever's on your mind, no matter how dumb it sounds. So we started talking about music and books, and before I knew it, we were sitting cross-legged on the bookstore floor, swapping stories about failed first dates and terrible playlists. It felt natural, like I'd known him way longer than a couple of hours. Fast forward a few dates later. It was one of those chilly spring nights where the air smells like rain, but never actually rains. We found ourselves back at my place after a late dinner, both too tired to do anything but crash. I remember lying down on my bed, Jamie next to me, his arm draped casually over my chest. We'd been talking about some dumb movie, but then the conversation just faded. I think he thought I was asleep because I stopped responding, but I wasn't. I was wide awake, and every little thing about him felt amplified in that quiet. He shifted a bit, and I swear I could feel the heat radiating off his skin right through the thin blanket. The subtle rhythm of his breathing, the slight twitch of his fingers as he absent-mindedly played with the hem of my shirt. It was like I was suddenly hyper-aware of this closeness I hadn't allowed myself to really notice before. There was something so fragile and real about that moment, something I wasn't ready to put into words yet. I didn't want to move or say anything to break the spell. I just lay there, pretending to sleep. But inside, I was completely awake, completely tangled up in how much I wanted to reach out and close the space between us, to tell him everything I hadn't said yet. But for now, I just watched and listened and felt everything he wasn't saying. And honestly, that night changed everything. But I didn't realize it until much later. I think what made that night stick with me wasn't just the obvious stuff, the warmth, the way his skin felt next to mine, or even the way my breath hitched a little every time he shifted. It was something quieter, a kind of invisible thread tying me to him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the way I suddenly wanted to know everything about him, from what made him laugh to what scared him when no one's around. We didn't talk about it the next day. I mean, we joked around like usual, but there was this undercurrent, something unspoken. I kept catching him looking at me out of the corner of his eye, like he was trying to figure out if I'd crossed some invisible line. And honestly, I was too scared to say anything myself, like admitting how I felt would change everything, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. One evening, about a week after that night, we ended up at this little dive bar not far from my apartment. It was the kind of place with sticky floors, neon signs that buzzed faintly, and a jukebox blasting 80s rock. Jamie had one of those cheesy smiles on his face, the kind that made me want to punch him and kiss him at the same time. I swear, sometimes he didn't even realize how much he got under my skin. We were sitting at the bar, nursing cheap beers, when he suddenly leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" "You've been kinda quiet tonight." I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but my heart was doing this ridiculous drum solo in my chest. Just tired, I guess. He didn't buy it. Of course not. Jamie never did. He reached out and nudged my arm lightly, and the touch was electric. For a second, I thought about saying something, maybe just blurting out that I liked him more than just a friend, but I shut down before the words made it to my lips. Instead, he smiled that crooked smile again and said, "You know, it's okay to be tired about stuff, or people, I looked at him, a little confused. What do you mean? He shrugged, eyes twinkling. Nothing, just sometimes it feels like you're carrying too much, but you don't want to admit it, even to yourself. I wanted to tell him that was exactly how I felt whenever I was around him. That sometimes I felt like I was wearing my heart on my sleeve, and it scared the hell out of me. Instead, I just laughed awkwardly and changed the subject, which is classic me. But later, walking him home that night, the city felt different. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows, and Jamie's hand brushed mine almost by accident. Neither of us pulled away. I caught his gaze, and in that moment, I swear the rest of the world faded out. I'm glad you came out tonight, he said softly. Yeah, I replied, voice barely above a whisper. Me too. That night, when I got back to my apartment, I didn't sleep at all. I kept replaying every little thing, the way his eyes held mine, the warmth of his hand, the words he didn't say but maybe wanted to. I'd never felt this kind of nervous excitement before, like standing on the edge of something huge without knowing if I'd fall or fly. The next few weeks were a mess of stolen glances and half-finished sentences. We hang out, laugh, argue about dumb stuff, and somehow, everything felt charged with this electric tension that neither of us talked about. I wanted to ask him out properly, to stop pretending I didn't want more, but every time I tried, my mouth went dry and my mind blanked. One rainy afternoon, we were sitting on the floor in my living room, drinking lukewarm coffee and pretending to work on separate laptops. Jamie was hunched over, headphones in, tapping his foot to some song only he could hear. I was watching him, trying to work up the courage to say something. Finally, I blurted, "Hey, Jamie, can I ask you something?" He pulled out one earbud and looked at me, eyebrows raised. Depends on the question. I swallowed hard. Do you ever feel like maybe we're more than just friends? Or is that crazy? He blinked, then smiled. A real, soft smile that made my chest tighten. Not crazy, he said carefully. I've thought about it. A lot, actually. My heart leapt, but I kept going. Because I feel the same. I just didn't want to mess things up between us. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. Sometimes the best things come from taking a risk. In that moment, with the rain tapping gently on the window and his hand still warm against my face, I realized I didn't want to pretend anymore. I didn't want to wait for perfect timing or the right words because maybe, just maybe, what we had was already perfect enough. And so I leaned in and kissed him. Soft at first, uncertain, but then with all the hope I'd been holding back for weeks. It was messy and real, and everything I'd been waiting for without even knowing it. He pulled back, smiling that same crooked smile, and whispered, I'm glad you felt everything, even when you thought I didn't know. That night, I finally understood. Sometimes, the quietest moments speak the loudest. And sometimes, feeling everything is the most honest way to say, I love you. After that night, things between Jamie and me shifted in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Like we'd crossed some invisible line, and there was no going back, but also no rush to define exactly where we'd landed. It was just us, with this new layer of something softer and deeper beneath the usual banter and jokes. We started spending more time together, but not in the typical let's hang out way. There was an intimacy in the little moments, like when Jamie would curl up on the couch next to me, his head resting on my shoulder as we watched some mindless show neither of us really cared about. Or when we cooked dinner together and ended up making a mess of the kitchen, laughing at our failed attempts to follow a recipe. One afternoon, we decided to take a walk through the local park. It was early spring, so the air was still crisp, but the trees were just starting to show hints of green. Jamie had his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, and I could feel his warmth through the thin fabric of mine. You ever think about how weird it is? He started, that we can get so close to someone and still not really know everything about them? I looked at him, surprised by the sudden seriousness. All the time? I guess that's part of the mystery, though. Like, you're always discovering new things. He nodded slowly, then said, yeah, like that time you told me about your terrible college roommate who somehow managed to make a cactus die. I'm still not sure how that's even possible. I laughed, the sound echoing between us. Right? I swear, it was a talent. And you, with your obsession over vintage cameras, how do you even make those work? Jamie grinned, but then his expression softened. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I like discovering new things about you, even the weird random stuff. It makes you real. I swallowed, feeling my cheeks warm. I like that about you too. You don't try to change me or pretend I'm someone I'm not. We walked in comfortable silence for a bit, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. Then Jamie stopped and turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "Can I ask you something a little more serious?" he said. "Sure," I replied, my heart picking up pace. "Do you ever worry about what comes next?" His voice was quiet but steady. Like, after all this, us. What happens if it gets complicated, or if people don't get it? I hesitated, because, yeah, I thought about that, more than I wanted to admit. The idea of facing judgment, or losing what we had because it didn't fit into some neat box, scared me. But looking at Jamie, I realized I didn't want to shrink away, just because of that fear. "No," I said finally. "I mean, yeah, it's scary, but I don't want to let that stop me from being with you. Whatever comes, we figure it out together." He smiled, relief washing over his face. "Yeah, together." A few days later, Jamie invited me over to his place for dinner. It was a small apartment, cluttered with books and photos, and that same pile of poetry books I'd first noticed when we met. He cooked this elaborate pasta dish that was way better than anything I could make, and we sat at his tiny kitchen table, eating and talking about everything and nothing. After dinner, we moved to the couch, and Jamie put on some soft jazz. The way he put his arm around me felt natural, like it belonged there. I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Can I tell you something?" he murmured. "Always." He hesitated, then said, "I've never really been good at this whole opening up thing, but with you, I feel like I can be myself. Like I don't have to pretend." I looked up at him, my chest tightening. "Me too. I think that's why I've been so scared. Because it's new, and it matters." He smiled, brushing a hand through my hair. "It matters to me too." That night, lying there next to him, I realized that the moments I'd felt the most alive were the ones where I could just be with Jamie, no masks, no pretenses. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was real. And sometimes that's all you need. A few weeks later, I met his friends for the first time. I was nervous. What if they didn't like me? Or worse, what if Jamie felt like I wasn't good enough? But when I saw the way his face lit up as he introduced me and how warmly they welcomed me, some of that fear melted away. After that, things began to settle into this new rhythm. We'd argue now and then, like all couples do, but we always found our way back to each other. And when life got messy, like when my job became stressful or Jamie's family drama flared up, we leaned on each other. One evening, a few months after that first kiss, Jamie and I were sitting on the rooftop of my apartment building, looking out over the city lights. He took my hand in his, fingers entwining naturally. "I'm glad you felt everything that night," he said softly. "Because I feel everything with you too." I squeezed his hand, a smile spreading across my face. "Yeah, me too." And in that moment, under a blanket of stars and the hum of the city below, I knew we were exactly where we were supposed to be. We sat there for a while, just holding hands and watching the city below. The usual chaos of honking cars and people shouting felt distant, softened by the night air and the quiet between us. Jamie rested his head on my shoulder, and I could feel the steady rise and fall of his breath. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt exactly right, even though I knew life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. I wanted to stay like that forever, but eventually Jamie shifted and sat up, stretching his arms toward the stars. "Hey," he said, voice a little hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" I turned to look at him, curious. "Of course." He took a deep breath, like he was gathering courage. "Have you ever thought about us living together? Like, actually sharing a space?" God, that question hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't really thought about it in a serious way yet. I liked Jamie more than I ever thought I would, but moving in together felt like a huge step, a commitment, something that meant trust on a whole different level. I hesitated, rubbing the back of my neck. Honestly, yeah, I have, but it scares me a little. Not because of you, just the idea of changing everything so fast. He smiled softly, as if he understood without me needing to say more. Yeah, I get that. It's a big deal. We fell back into silence, the cityscape flickering below us. But the idea planted itself in my mind, growing roots I didn't expect. What would it be like, waking up next to Jamie every day? Sharing a tiny kitchen, arguing over who left the lights on, laughing over dumb inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else? A few days later, Jamie brought it up again, this time over coffee at the same bookstore where we met. We were sitting by the window, sunlight streaming in and dust motes dancing in the air. I was thinking, he said, stirring his latte absent-mindedly. There's this apartment for rent just a few blocks from here. It's small, but it's got a balcony, and it's pet-friendly. I raised an eyebrow, trying to hide how excited I was. Are you trying to tell me something? He grinned, eyes sparkling. Maybe. We spent the rest of the afternoon poking around the online listing, imagining what it'd be like to make that place ours. I could picture it. The mismatched furniture, the way I'd probably leave my clothes everywhere, and Jamie rolling his eyes but never really minding. Still, the fear lingered. What if we weren't ready? What if living together meant seeing sides of each other that we couldn't handle? I kept those thoughts mostly to myself, not wanting to ruin the moment. A week later, we decided to see the apartment in person. The landlord was an older woman with a warm smile, and the place was even better than the pictures. Bright rooms, hardwood floors, and that balcony Jamie had mentioned. We stood in the empty living room, imagining where the couch would go, debating what color the walls should be. This could be ours, Jamie said quietly. I looked at him, feeling a rush of something I hadn't expected. Hope, maybe. Yeah, it could. And just like that, the idea didn't seem so scary anymore. Moving day was chaos in the best way. Boxes everywhere, music blasting, us tripping over each other trying to figure out where to put the bookshelf. Jamie was in charge of assembling the bed frame, which ended up with a few screws left over and a wobbly corner, but it was ours. I cooked dinner that first night in our tiny kitchen, a slightly burnt pasta dish, but Jamie ate it with that smile that made me feel like Gordon Ramsay had just given me a Michelin star. After dinner, we sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below us. Jamie pulled me close, and I rested my head against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart against mine. I'm glad we did this, he murmured. Me too, I said. But as the weeks passed, living together brought its own set of challenges. We weren't perfect, and sometimes the little things felt overwhelming, like how Jamie always left his coffee mugs in the sink, or how I tended to stay up way too late, scrolling mindlessly on my phone. We had arguments, nothing huge, just the kind that sneak up when two people share space and have different habits. One night, after a particularly dumb fight about whose turn it was to take out the trash, Jamie slammed the door to the bedroom and didn't come out for what felt like forever. I sat on the couch, heart pounding, wondering if I'd messed this up before it really started. Eventually, he came out, looking tired but softer. He sat beside me and reached for my hand. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I hate fighting with you. Me too, I admitted. But maybe it's just part of figuring this out. We're not used to this. He nodded, squeezing my hand. Yeah, we'll get there. And we did, slowly but surely. We found ways to compromise, to laugh at our quirks, and to make space for each other's differences. We learned that love wasn't just about the perfect moments, but about weathering the imperfect ones together. One evening, a few months after moving in, Jamie surprised me with tickets to a concert for a band we both loved. We danced like idiots under the stage lights, arms wrapped around each other, and I felt that same electric thrill from the early days, but stronger, deeper. Afterward, walking home under a sky full of stars, Jamie stopped and looked at me, his eyes shining. I love you, he said, voice steady but full of feeling. I smiled, my heart swelling. I love you too. And just like that, all the fear and uncertainty melted away. leaving only us. Two guys who felt everything, even when the other thought they were asleep. After that night, when Jamie said those 3 words, everything felt a little different. Not in a flashy, dramatic way, but in a quiet, grounding way. Like finally hearing the words I had been too scared to say myself, and realizing they were exactly what I needed to hear. I didn't rush to say it back right away. Instead, I just smiled and pulled him closer, letting the moment stretch between us, full and warm. A few days later, I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing and soft jazz playing from the kitchen. Jamie was there, looking half awake but proud of himself for being the morning person, which he definitely was not. I shuffled over, still tangled in the sheets, and he handed me a mug. "You survived the night without me kicking you out of bed," he teased. I gave him my best sleepy grin, barely. It was mornings like that I realized how deeply intertwined our lives had become. I'd moved in thinking I was ready for all of it, but some days I still caught myself marveling at how natural it felt to have Jamie there, making coffee, laughing at my terrible jokes, annoying me when he stole the covers. But life, as it tends to do, wasn't always smooth sailing. About a month after that concert, I got a call from work that shook things up. My company was downsizing, and my position was on the chopping block. Suddenly, the future we'd started building felt fragile. I kept it quiet for a while, not wanting to worry Jamie, but the stress was eating me up inside. I found myself snapping over little things, avoiding his touch when I felt too lost in my own head. One evening, after a particularly rough day, Jamie sat me down in the living room, his eyes serious yet gentle. "Talk to me," he said. "What's going on?" I sighed, the words heavy on my tongue. "I lost my job." He didn't say anything at first, just took my hand and squeezed it. "We'll figure it out. Together." Those words became a lifeline. Over the next weeks, Jamie was my anchor. He stayed up late, helping me update my resume, dragged me to networking events when I wanted to hide, and reminded me daily that my worth wasn't tied to a paycheck. One night, while we were lying in bed, Jamie reached over and brushed my hair back. "You know, this is the kind of stuff that makes us stronger, not weaker." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But some mornings when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the tired, stressed-out guy staring back. Then, there was the moment I'll never forget. We'd just finished dinner, and I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through job listings, when Jamie plopped down next to me with a mischievous grin. "Hey, want to get out of here for a bit?" I raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "Somewhere that reminds us why life's worth living. Trust me." Curiosity won out, and we hopped in his car, windows down despite the chill. The city skyline blurred past as he drove, and after about 20 minutes, we pulled up near the river. The boardwalk was quiet, lit only by scattered street lamps and the moon's reflection on the water. Jamie took my hand, dragging me toward the edge where the city lights sparkled like a constellation. "Look at that," he said softly. "No matter what happens, the world keeps turning. And so do we." I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling some of the tension ease away. It wasn't a grand solution to my problems, but in that moment, it was enough. Over the next few weeks, things slowly improved. I landed some interviews, and Jamie's unwavering support made the difference between despair and hope. We talked about the future more seriously, about what we wanted, where we saw ourselves in a year or 5. One afternoon, while we were cleaning the apartment, Jamie found an old photo of us from that first bookstore day. He held it up, smiling fondly. "Remember this?" "How could I forget?" I laughed. "You looked like you were auditioning for a quirky indie film." He nudged me playfully. "And you looked like you were ready to run away from my weirdness." We both laughed, that easy, comfortable kind that only comes from knowing someone inside and out. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far we'd come, from pretending to be asleep to feeling everything, from first awkward kisses to real messy love. The truth was, there were still fears creeping in, the fear of losing what we'd built, the fear of not being enough. But those moments of doubt were quieter now, drowned out by the steady rhythm of us growing together. "I'm not going anywhere." I reached for him, fingers tracing the curve of his jaw. "Neither am I." And just like that, the night wrapped around us, a promise that no matter what came next, we would face it side by side. Because sometimes, love is less about grand declarations and more about the quiet certainty you feel when you know someone's holding your hand in the dark. Months passed, and with every one of them, Jamie and I grew more comfortable in this life we'd chosen together. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but ours, full of small victories and quiet moments that somehow felt incredibly big. My job search finally ended when I found something that wasn't just a paycheck, but a place where I felt like I could breathe again. Jamie celebrated like I'd won an Olympic medal, which honestly, in that moment felt just as important. One chilly evening, after a lazy Sunday of cooking too much and watching old movies, Jamie and I found ourselves curled up on the couch, the city lights twinkling faintly through the window. He looked over at me with that same crooked smile, the one that had stopped my heart the first time I saw it. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who wakes up and wants to build a life with someone. But with you, it feels natural." I reached for his hand, squeezing gently. "Me too. It's not always easy, but it's real. And that's what matters." He leaned in, resting his forehead against mine, and in that simple gesture, all the fear and uncertainty we'd faced seemed to wash away. I realized then that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up day after day, choosing each other, even when things weren't simple or clear. Later, as we sat talking about future plans, maybe a trip, maybe adopting a dog, maybe just staying in and seeing where life took us, I felt a deep gratitude for that night when I pretended to be asleep but felt everything instead. It was the moment everything began. Love, I learned, is sometimes quiet and patient. It's found in the shared silences, the small touches, the honest conversations in the dark. It's choosing vulnerability and trust, even when it's scary. And with Jamie by my side, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. Because sometimes feeling everything, really feeling it, is the most beautiful way to say, "I'm home."